All right. Well, welcome everyone to our June webinar. The topic of today is breaking bias and building connections. I can tell you from personal experience that we're going to be covering some uncomfortable topics because it's going to involve a lot of introspection and a lot of reflection. And I'm really, really excited about today. I got to take a peek at our presenter slide deck, and it is some amazing stuff. But with no more further ado, let's go ahead and do some introductions. First, my name is Devin. I am the Director of Marketing Automation and Analytics here at 08. And today joining us is an amazing human being. I've had a chance to completely cyberstalk his LinkedIn, and he is just posts some amazing stuff, great content, really heartwarming. He's a dad. He's dope. His name is Andre Cohen, and he is the Office of Diversity Inclusion Program Director at the Mayo Clinic. Andre, how you doing today?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. Thank you for the stalk. No, I appreciate that. We're doing this series right now. This is funny. Home office, and so I have a 2-year-old daughter. She's taking a nap right now, but she's always doing these things to mess up my office day. She's actually warming my office day to make it more meaningful, working from home and all. So, thanks for the like on that post. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. He's the real one because he lets his daughter paint his nails, and that to me is so special. I have nothing but sons that live with me, and it's mostly just disgustingness. It's all disgustingness.
But you got Deadpool. You got
This is
Deadpool.
true.
That brings families together.
That's right. He has so much Deadpool stuff. It's fantastic. Well, to go over everything we've talked about, what we're going to be talking about, we've done our welcome intro. We are given general information. We've just done the host introductions. So what we're going to do is we're just going to jump into the presentation, and then we'll talk about Q&A section. Q&A session. We'll bring up some special recognition, cool things that have been happening in and around 08. And of course with Andre, and then we'll adjourn. But real quick, let's do some quick housekeeping. We're going to keep this at 60 minutes, and if you want to keep the conversation going, you can. Feel free to jump on our LinkedIn and comment on what you liked, what you loved. If you have questions, you can find Andre online and LinkedIn, and plus he has a whole bunch of stuff that he's doing, and we're going to give him a chance to talk about that later. If you have some questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A panel where Seth put in Minneapolis is warm. So definitely, and I'm just going to go ahead and click that we answered that one live. Yes, it is. You can put in there wherever you'd like to have your questions. Audience will be on mute, so feel free to have your dogs, your children, everything. You don't have to worry about interfering. And if you have to jump off, or if you really want to share some of this content with a friend, and I know you will, we'll have this webinar recording, and the deck will be available for you after the webinar. So keep an eye on your email. So with that, Andre, please feel free to take the wheel.
And here we go. So one of the things I like for folks to do in the chat room, if you could, when you think about diversity and inclusion, and we'll throw in equity as well, right? So all these new kind of buzzwords, what comes to mind for you? So type that in the chat room. Like, what kinds of things? You can use one word. You don't have to write me a whole dissertation. You can. What comes to mind for you when you hear or you think about this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion? What comes to top of mind? I know some of you may be on a mobile device and you may not be able to type into the chat room. So don't feel any pressure. Do what you can. But I am interested just to see and hear what folks are thinking when they think about this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Devin, when you think about that, what comes up for you? So as people are populating that stuff in the chat, Devin, I just want to ask you, what's top of mind?
Well, for me, diversity is just multiple, backgrounds, uh, whatever the culture may be it race, be it sexuality, whatever it is. It's about bringing multiple perspectives in, and the inclusion aspect is people being able to use the lens with which they see life
Mm-hmm.
in order to contribute and be able to bring that added value to it. As far as equity is concerned, that's a new one for me, man.
All right, cool. We'll go there. We'll go there. So what about white people? Do white people? I mean, all the things you talked about, does that exclude white people or include white people in the whole mix of that diversity and inclusion stuff you were just talking about?
Well, it definitely includes white people, but a lot of the disconnect is that when you hear white people say, well, what about white people, what about our day, what about our time, it's straight white male is the default setting and everything else is other.
Right.
And so if we're going to include everyone, we need to have a conversation that is different than the last 250 years plus of this country's history.
Yeah, and you know what? So I appreciate that because I think you're absolutely right. I, what I would add though is that it is an and, not an either or, right?
Yes,
It is
it's
all
not a
about
zero
the
sum statement.
right? So when we think about this stuff, what I want us to think about is not whether something is good or bad, whether it's right or wrong, right? So is our history right? Is our history wrong? Is it? I want you to suspend those just for a second, because now what I'd like for you to do is to elevate your thinking and elevate our thinking to what is effective and what is ineffective. Right. So yes, for last 150 years or so, there's been the model or the apex of all things that were normal or right or good or whatever. What was kind of this Protestant Christian white male as the archetype. But the context now has changed. And so the question isn't, is that right or wrong? The question is that archetype that everyone should fit into effective? Do our organizations benefit from having one archetype, or do we benefit from diverse perspectives? And so I'm going to go to the chat room just for a second. There are a couple of comments. Jason said that when he thinks about diversity and inclusion and possibly equity, that it's about expanding the circle. Karen says that it's race, gender, orientation, and it's opening to new voices, right? Seth says being able to bring your true self to your job. Now, Seth, I do want to say, I might not want to see all of your whole self, your true self. So make sure you just bring your best self to work, right? So when we get into this presentation, and I want to apologize ahead of time that given the time constraints, this is a lifetime of work. So I'm going to spend about 45 minutes with you. So I'm only going to be able to give you a teaser. This isn't even a hors d'oeuvres, I think it's called. No, or hors d'oeuvres, right? So I'm not even giving hors d'oeuvres. This is like the I don't know if your mom did this. So whenever we went to somebody else's house or a party, she would feed us, even though we were going to go there to eat. Right. So this is your home cooking before we go to so we don't embarrass ourselves. Anyway, so let me get into this presentation. And if you see anything that is that might not agree with you, or maybe a little bit different than what you've heard, any mistakes, chalk it up to my humanity, not to my intelligence, and roll with me, rock with me. All right. So we're going to talk about this idea of what it means to kind of build these connections. How do we build these bridges? And we have to break bias. Now, Devin, do you have some biases?
Oh, absolutely.
Would you mind just sharing one that you would like to share, a bias that you have?
Ooh, man. Well, I can talk about a bias that I had.
Okay, that's
Um,
fine.
yeah, it was for the longest time because of where I grew up. I assumed that if someone didn't sound like me, it was a lack of intelligence.
Okay.
And it was just one of those things I didn't even realize. I remember I was catching a bus because I missed my flight, so I had to get on Greyhound, which I'll never do again. And I met an Indian guy, and he was
From
like,
from
"Hey, how you
Southeast
doing?"
Asia or
Yes, Southeast
okay,
Asia.
okay,
Yes, India, Indian.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And so we were having a conversation, and he says, "Do you mind if we talk just so I can practice my English?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And so we had a long conversation about a variety of different things, how he was getting around, who he was staying with, all that fun stuff. And then a Mexican comes up to us and asks him a question in Spanish. And me, who speaks very broken Spanish, and I spoke it better then than I do now, I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's not Mexican. He's actually from India." And the guy is like, "Oh, okay." And then uh, the Mexican guy asked the Indian guy, "Do you speak French?" But he asked him in French, and the Indian guy says, "Yeah." And they just started this whole nother conversation that I was not at all privy to. And I felt so stupid I immediately thought for some reason that I was the smart one there. And it's like, no, you're actually an idiot because you only speak 1.5 languages and these guys speak 2 plus. So, yeah, you're an idiot. And so that was a huge eye opening experience for me, one that I've taken with me all through my adult life.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being so transparent. And I think if we were all honest, we would say that we have bias, right? And the thing about bias is that it is a part of our humanness. It is a part of being human. However, we have to be mindful of how that bias influences our decision making, right? So it's not about if it's good or bad. Remember, I alluded to that. It's really about, is this bias affecting me in a way that is preventing me from reaching my goals, right? So if I have a bias towards a piece of cake over a piece of something, the scale of that compared to having a bias for or against a member of the human family is a little bit different, right? So I do want to make those distinctions, or have at least people think about those distinctions, that the impact is so much more different when we talk about things, bias towards or against things, and then when we apply that bias to, for, or against people, right? So I do want to make that distinction. So let's get into it. So here are a couple of my objectives. I've kind of laid some of that stuff out. I just want you to start thinking about this, the roots of how you're thinking, your metacognition. So I'm going to move on a little bit further. These are some agreements I'd like for us to lean into. So as we think about how we have conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion, and we'll talk about this equity thing in just a little bit, but I want us to think about how do we shut down some of those barriers, and some of the ways that we shut down those barriers when it comes to talking about diversity issues, and I'm going to lump them all into this idea of diversity issues, is that we need to be fully present when we're trying to engage, right? So there's nothing like trying to talk about difficult subjects with folks who are half there. And Devin mentioned I'm a father, and I haven't always been the best father. I try to be better every day. But I remember my daughter, so I have two daughters. I have a 7-year-old and I have a 2-year-old. And my 7-year-old at the time was much younger, and she was calling my name. She said, "Dad, Dad, 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 Dad." And then finally she stopped calling my name, and then she started clapping. And I looked at her, I was like, "Who are you clapping at?" And she looked at me back and said, I'm clapping at you. And it hit me. She was doing that. She was making all that noise. She was calling my name because I was physically present, but I wasn't mentally engaged in the space that I was in, right? And so when we think about these agreements, let's be fully present. Let's be respectful. I was actually being disrespectful with my daughter, being physically in the place, but not mentally available to her as we were supposed to be playing this game, right? Be aware of your own emotions. Recognize that emotions are valid data points that should be brought alongside other data points, right? So emotions are valuable data. Speak for yourself, not for others. And that even goes into some of these questions, right? Like, my uncle Bob said that he saw the person and they got the thing and he didn't get the thing. Okay, that's cool. But like, I really want you to think about what has happened for you, because sometimes we inherit stories that aren't in fact our stories, right? So I want to talk about your stories. Also, I think it's important to enter a lot of these conversations with this mindset of curiosity and not judgment. Right? What happens when you think you already know the answer to a problem? Devin, has that ever happened to you where you walked up to a problem and you said, you know what, I already got the answer to this. This is going to be an easy one.
Oh, yes. I've been a teenager once.
He was a teenager once. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, when you think you know everything, sometimes you miss the pieces, right? So, IKEA gets me every time because I don't know why they keep tossing in these extra pieces, because I already know, I saw the picture, I know how this is supposed to go, but they keep adding extra pieces. No, the fact of the matter is, if we're not mindful, if we're not curious, then we actually miss things, right? And so they're not putting in these extra pieces in IKEA. I'm just missing it because I think I already know. Right. And then don't be dismissive in your comments and maintain confidentiality. And what I mean by that is keep comments that we chat in the type in the chat room and things that we say, keep them in the context of this conversation. And I learned this in this session, and this is what the speaker said in this session, because I don't speak for all. And again, context is extremely important in understanding what's going on. So a couple of things. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we continue, can somebody just type yes, just to let me know that you can see Andre's screen? I just want to make sure that we're sharing okay. So go ahead and yes, cool.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Karen.
Good. Karen. Oh, right. Amy. Thank you, Amy Tiffany. That is funny. Amy Tiffany's got one of those rock star names that you got to say the whole thing. Right, like some people you say just Andre. I'm Andre, but she's like Amy. You got to say Amy Tiffany.
I'm never going to say Amy Tiffany. That is the name.
That is the name.
Yeah. That is the name. Yes.
So this is what I also want to point out to you, and I think Devin pointed this out a little bit earlier in the presentation, that there are ways in which we can have conversations that are actually effective, even difficult conversations, even conversations we haven't practiced, right? And one is to go into the conversation thinking about motivation. So are you trying to drain someone's motivation, or are you trying to fuel their motivation, right? And so if we're going to we know that guilt, fault, blame, shame does not fill folks' motivation. It drains motivation. And so I'm not interested in conversations that do that. Now, if you feel like these things are occurring, please, speak up and share, but that's certainly not my intention. And recognize those emotions, because that is valid information that you should be adding to the stack of your other data. But what I want to do is I want us to approach this conversation with curiosity, exploration, problem solving, being productive. These are the kinds of things that fuel us as we engage. And so when we think about this idea of breaking down bias and building connections, which of these does that? It's certainly the curiosity. It is certainly the exploration. It's the problem solving. It's the being productive, right? That actually creates those methods for building those relationships. And so I want you to think about not just this as these outlines, but like these are some practical tips that you can use in building relationships across differences, and put those alongside data, put those alongside the scientific method, put those alongside your values, and you will find that you are able to build these relationships across so-called differences. And I even want to challenge that oftentimes our differences are just obstacle illusions. That our differences are obstacle illusions, artificial barriers to authentic human relationships, right? And can somebody write that and type that in the chat room, right? Obstacle illusions. Obstacle illusions. All right, we're going to continue. And so when we think about this notion of bridges, we build these connections. What is the purpose of a bridge? And so for those of you who can type into the chat room, if you can type into the chat room, what is the purpose of a bridge? So type that into the chat room. Devin, do you remember, were you in the Twin Cities when the 35W bridge collapsed?
I've never been to the Twin Cities in my life.
Oh, really? Oh my goodness. Okay. So if anybody was in there, just type, yes, you remember the 35. So this is something that happened, Devin. And I got to tell you, it was catastrophic. I mean, it was cataclysmically catastrophic. So the Mississippi River, obviously most of us are familiar with the Mississippi River. There's a bridge in the Twin Cities where it crosses the Mississippi. One of the bridges collapsed. Like Tuesday, it said, you know what? I'm not working. Bam! It just fell into the Mississippi. People were on those bridges. People lost their lives as a part of that calamity. And folks are still wondering why it happened. And Devin, why do you think people are spending? They did investigations. They did all this stuff. Why do you think that they spent so much time trying to figure out why that bridge collapsed?
Make sure it doesn't happen again.
Make sure it doesn't happen again. And what else? Are bridges supposed to do that, Devin?
Oh, no.
No. Right? So when we think about this idea of building these connections, we're building connections that are supposed to last, that are supposed to not fail us. And when they do fail us, we have to investigate, right? And so Karen put in that it connects 2 points, right? So if I have this obstacle illusion that is separating me and someone else, then I need something to help make that connection, to build that bridge. Seth said it is to cross something that is difficult, right? It is certainly it certainly makes traveling over water a lot easier than if I had to get into my boat or into some other device. So yeah, so we cross these differences. So there is this notion that there are two things that need to be connected, and so I would suggest that's what we're going to talk about today, right? So how do we address bias? So what I'd like for you to do, if you're able, again, in the chat room, is I'd like for you to count the number of triangles that are there. And Devin, when you look at this, how many triangles do you see?
Well, I'm seeing quite a few. I'm seeing, 1, and then I'm seeing the negative space 2. But then I'm also seeing triangles that are built out. So you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm seeing 8. And
okay, so you see 8. Beth Carter says that Beth Carter sees 8. I wonder if anybody else sees triangles. Oh, Sarah says
Sarah sees 11.
Yeah, sees 11. Karen is at 8.
See, now I'm trying to see Sarah's 11.
Yes, now she's got you going at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So while people are still writing the number of triangles in the chat room, because I'm very curious, Devin, can you define for me a triangle? How does
Sure.
one define a triangle?
It's a shape with 3 sides.
It's got 3 sides. All right.
Yes.
What else does it have? What's another feature?
It has 3 angles. And actually, now that I'm the more I look at this, one could argue that there are no triangles in this picture.
One could argue that.
One could indeed argue that.
One could argue that. And one would be absolutely correct.
There are implied triangles, but there are no actual triangles in this image.
Okay, Devin, so walk me through this. How did you come to this place where you saw 8 and then you realized, wait a minute, there are no triangles? How did you come to that place?
Well, once you started asking the question, because first, you're seeing the shapes and you're looking at negative space and you're essentially overcomplicating it. But then when you get down to the root of the question, what actually defines a triangle? It's like, okay, well, there are no shapes here with 3 sides.
White people are like this. Asian people are like this. I know what black people are like, right? We're walking into these relationships already with these biases. But then when we take a step back, we go, well, wait a minute. I like chicken. They like chicken. Those people like chicken too. Maybe chicken just isn't for my people. I like to ski. They like to ski. Maybe skiing just ain't for people who, right? So I'm being facetious and I'm being silly, but I hope you can start seeing the point, right? And the real part between Devin and I was this notion that we started communicating about a shared experience. So we're seeing these triangles together, but without communication, we may walk away with very different. Some folks will walk away with 11. Some folks will walk away with 8 triangles. Some folks will walk up and say, what are you talking about? There are no triangles with 0. But until we're able to communicate, we're going to walk away in conflict. And sometimes people get conflict confused. I would suggest that conflict is recognizing that we're not in sync in how we're understanding a common experience. Being out of sync is conflict. It doesn't mean that I have to dislike you. It doesn't mean that I have to have negative things about you, but we're in discord. Our approaches, our thinking about these things are in conflict. And so how do we minimize conflict? Through communication. And the more we can talk, the more we can learn. That story that you gave, Devin, about being on the Greyhound bus is a prime example of this, right? The more we communicate with folks, the more we know, the more we learn, but also humility kicks in if we're smart and says, you know what? If we're smart. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just totally co-signing. You are all up on my couch. Please continue.
Yeah, no, not a problem. But I won't put my feet on your couch because I know what happens, because Rick James does not like that. He does not like that. That's a Dave Chappelle joke. Watch it if you're over.
Highly
18.
recommend.
Okay.
Highly recommend.
All right, let's keep moving. So there are 4 pillars of this notion of allyship. So if you want to kind of, be an ally in this space, there's some things that I want you to kind of think about. First is breaking bias, which is what we're talking about today. Next is the recognition of historic and systemic oppression. And right now, I just want to put this out here as a tag. People are coming against this thing called critical race theory. And what I would like to submit to you is that critical race theory is simply looking at the laws that have been instituted in the United States that continue to impact folks. So if folks don't want to look at those laws, it makes me nervous, because if we don't recognize where we've made mistakes, we are liable to make those same mistakes in the future. So just want to put a plug in for that. This notion of examining privilege, we all have earned and unearned privilege, right? You know, the fact that I look as good as I do, it gives me stuff. You know, people are just like, I get free smiles all the time just because I'm so handsome and humble. I'm very humble. So you know that, right? So we all have earned and unearned privilege, but the problem isn't the privilege itself. It's when it turns into an attitude of entitlement. Because I've got this degree, or because I look this good, I should ... That's when you know you're in a problem, in a position that your privilege is becoming problematic, right? When it turns into entitlement. And then lastly, we can wield power, and not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something. All right. So I just want to put that out there. So those are some important points to kind of think about. Let me look at the time, because I don't want to.
We're at 32.
Yeah, we're going to skip this. This will be in the deck. You can call me later. We'll do a one-on-one session on this. But I want to make sure that I leave time for questions and comments. So this activity, I'm also listening for my 2-year-old, because she's taking a nap. I'm not sure if she was moving around or not. So what I'd like for you to do in this activity is to think about your childhood growing up, and whatever time frame you want to put that in. And what I'd like for you to do is to tell me if the folks on the left side of this chart, what kind of information did they give you about these groups across the top, right? So parents and family, friends, workplace and school, TV, movies, and media, and from personal experience, what did you learn about African Americans, white Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, disabled Americans, Latino Americans, LGBTQ Americans, veterans, and other religions? If it was something positive, I want you to put a plus in the corresponding box. If it was something negative, I want you to put a minus in the corresponding box. If it was never anything that you talked about, I want you to put a 0. And so I'm not sure if folks are familiar with how to annotate in Zoom, but there should be either under More or under View a pencil
View options
that looks like an annotation. That's for annotating, right? So Devin, are you seeing that?
I am. So I clicked on view options, and and if for whatever reason that you can't, definitely screenshot it and go for it.
Yeah.
And just try this on your own computer. But this will definitely give you some insight into a lot of your own personal bias. This is my favorite part of the whole presentation.
Yeah, and this is fun. This is, so I want you to be brave. So first of all, no one's judging anything that you put on. As a matter of fact, the more of us that put our things on here, the more dynamic this becomes. So I want so be brave. The other thing is to note that you can have pluses and minuses in the same box, but size matters.
Okay, so
right? So big
Beth
pluses
said
mean
she
lots
doesn't
of
see
positive.
annotation available.
Yep. Oh, it says it's not available. All right, then Devin, it's going to be me and you.
All right, let's do this.
All right,
let me go ahead and put myself out there.
Yeah, well, you know what, and you can put yourself out there as every man. You don't have to be Devin. You can be every man. All right. So we'll make you the common gray person, I think is what they call in my prepper communities. I'm sure there's no preppers anyway. All right. So
my dad's a prepper.
Oh, okay. Cool folks. Excuse me. So you know what? I'm going to do some pieces too. Just for the sake of conversation, right? Oh, that's too thick. Let's do something a little thinner. So for my friends in negative TV, movies, and media about white people seem to be pretty positive for me. I guess some negative because they had like corny white guys too. Personal experience, I would say it was actually a mix of both, to be quite honest. Um, Let me see.
I grew up in the Bay Area, and everyone loved Asian people in the Bay Area, including
Oh
myself.
yeah,
And I'm also part Asian, so
the top or left?
what do you mean?
Which part? Are your left side or your right side? Oh,
That's somebody's dad right there. That's somebody's dad.
right. So growing up, you know what? We didn't talk about. Although my family always talked about Native Americans in our family as having high cheekbones, and that's how they could tell people were Native American. You got high cheekbones. Um, School and workplace. I grew up in Ohio, and there wasn't a whole lot of conversations. They were both negative and zero. There weren't a lot of positive things that were said in Ohio. TV, movies, and media, pretty negative. Personal experience, I would say mostly positive. I live in Minnesota, so it's a heavily, relatively speaking, focused. Disabled Americans, parents and family, not a whole lot. Not a whole lot for my friends. Not a whole lot for school and work, other than Helen Keller. They talked about Helen Keller
Yes.
in school, right? TV, movies, and media. I don't know. Not a whole lot there. Maybe that should be a 0.
Well, for me, you had, Life Goes On. You had,
Yes.
yeah,
What
and
was that guy's
also
name? What was the
Porky.
character's name? Yes. Right?
And then you also had Drake in Degrassi High.
No, he's a
And
rapper.
well, he's a rapper now, but he used to be an actor. And
What?
yeah, yeah, a long time ago. Go Canada.
Wow. Okay. So personal experience, I would say plus. I have met some people who are disabled. They were just not likable people. Just like everybody else, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's the big takeaway that I've learned is that they're literally just like everybody else.
yeah. But like, you know what? You're really not a nice person who happens to also be in a wheelchair, right? Um, yeah. So I want to stop here just for a second, Devin. We're
Okay.
gonna have to go through all of this because I think folks are getting the lesson, and so let me save this picture for us, um, and if you could type in the chat room, what do you think is the lesson? What is the lesson in this experience? And
Definitely know
Beth,
what my
thank you
lesson
for.
is.
Yeah, go ahead. What was your lesson as you were going through this?
That it's nature versus nurture. A lot of who we are and how we see the world is based upon how the world was presented to us during our development phases.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with like the fact that wasn't exposed to I was exposed to a lot of different cultures, but I wasn't exposed to my own culture until I was older,
Uh huh.
until I was like in my late teens. And so it was I had biases about African Americans that I wasn't even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just due to lack of exposure.
Lack of exposure, and it
Yeah.
was funny. You talked about growing up on the West Coast, and there's some things about the West Coast that are very different than the Midwest, and there are things
Oh
that
yeah.
are very different in the Midwest that are different from the East Coast, right? And so, and there are things that are different from the North than they are from the South. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, can we be held accountable for all of that stuff?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So how's that work?
Um, Accountability boils down to you taking personal responsibility for your own actions. And for example, when I was the stupid American who thought I was smart because I was the only guy who was fluent in English, and then I got schooled, it's like, no, you are textbook stereotypical stupid American. That was an eye-opening moment for me, and that gave me an opportunity for personal growth. And to and real quick, Paul, you are putting on some really great stuff, but you're sending it directly to me only. Paul put out Paul put out perception is not reality. He's absolutely right. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own actions, regardless of where they come from. Like, there are people who do practice exclusionist things and do racist things, and it has no malicious intent, but that doesn't make it any less wrong. The Playboy interview with John Wayne, when he was talking about Black people needing to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, and that's when he will feel like he can include and work with Black people and incorporate them into everything, and feel more comfortable when they're able to build their own communities. And it's like, well, one, that's not how it works. But then also, nothing about what he said, and he even said it's not that he has a problem with Black people. It is not out of malicious intent, but he's just not going to include us. And it's like, okay, that's wrong, but hey, at least you're not being mean about it.
So this is what I like to offer, and I think you're absolutely right. What I would say though is that it is not my fault what my parents taught me or didn't teach me about the world. That's not my fault. Right? So my parents came out of a context, their parents came out of a context, their parents came out of the context, and they kept passing stuff down that we call paradigms, Paradigm. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me. Right? So they keep passing down these paradigms, and we keep accepting them. The problem is, sometimes the things that we've received no longer fit. I was lucky. I was the oldest of my brothers and sisters, so I didn't get a whole lot of hand-me-downs. But my brother is 2 sizes bigger than me. So when he got to get my hand-me-downs, it didn't work. So he had to get something totally new. And sometimes these paradigms that we've been given, we try to put on as if it is the gospel truth, as if there are triangles when there are in fact no triangles. And so we have to be humble enough to recognize these folks gave me what they thought was good, but it's not effective for me. It's not effective for me. So you're absolutely right, Devin. You will be held accountable for your actions. And so when I think about what was given to me, or when I don't think about what was given to me and I just operate with what they gave me and not be a critical thinker, then I will be held accountable for that. Just like I'll be accountable if I've been a critical thinker. What is Paul saying in the chat room? What did he say?
Cognitive dissonance. One of my favorite phrases.
Yeah. Can you break that down? Because, I was a middle school teacher. That's a big word.
Sure. Well, cognitive dissonance is basically, to simplify, it's just shaking your mind up. It's basically, you have this track that you're used to going down, and then you see that everything is not what you thought it was. And you can either change or you can rail against it. And some people don't handle cognitive dissonance well at all. They don't like having their viewpoints or their perspectives challenged or shaken up.
Yeah, because it means you have to do something. It means you got to do extra work, because if grandma said it and dad said it, I don't really have to think about it. I mean, if I don't think about it, I can just say it's because dad said it, because grandma said it. So I don't have to think about it. But when I have to start thinking about it, that cognitive dissonance becomes problematic. I think there was one more phrase that Paul had put into the room too. Perception.
Yes, perception is not reality.
I disagree. I would say perception is just as real as reality, because when you think about a thing and you do a thing, the same neural networks fire exactly the same. Which means that not only do I have to be conscious of what I do, I got to be conscious of what I think about what I do. Because otherwise, my brain is like, oh, this is the same thing. This is the same thing, right? So perception is important. I think sometimes those obstacle illusions get in the way, and we think that those things aren't important, but relationships matter. And so, what I'd like to just offer you, and I'm going to go ahead and clear this so we can go to the rest of our presentation, because I don't want to overstay my welcome. Is to really think about that. And so when I think about all of those things and those lessons that I got, I wonder for myself, are there unconscious biases that I could have in each of these groups? Are there unconscious, or are there microaggressions, which are the small annoying things that are me walking out my unconscious bias, right? So unconscious bias is what happens in between your ears. But the behaviors come out as microaggressions. One set of behaviors can come out as microaggressions. There are other ways that they can also come out, but I just want to talk about those microaggressions. And those are just those small things. Like, where are you from? No. Where are you really from?
Where are your people from?
Where are your people from? Right? Stuff like that. Or, can I help you? Can I help you? Right? Somebody asked me if my daughter was my grandchild, and I just had to back up, take a deep breath, and say no. Right? So microaggressions are these things that exacerbate or extend or exaggerate these obstacle illusions, these barriers that keep people apart. They're not trying to draw people closer together. They're actually trying to drive people away. So that's important. So when we think about what is the motivation, what is the drive, what are people after, and what I would suggest is that we're all after this notion of safety, significance, and belonging. Significance is the concept that I have purpose for being, and whether that purpose has been brought to me, by an archangel, or I discover it myself. Those are things that are important, right? So significance. Belonging means that I want to be in relationships with people who understand my significance, and safety means I want to be physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically safe to be in relationships with people who understand my significance, right? So if people are, I think Devin used this term before, racist. What are racist people after? They are after safety, significance, and belonging. What are those people who are sexist? What are they after? What do they hope to secure by making somebody else feel small or making someone feel like an outsider? What do they hope to gain by doing that? Probably safety, significance, and belonging. So here comes the crux. Here comes the hard part. This is where, you got to pull up your grown-up clothes or whatever. I forgot how they say that, right? So if the person that is what my teenagers would call my op, if the person is my op, I'm getting excited. If the person is my opposite and they're after the same thing that I'm after, are we actually opposites? Devin, what do you think about that? So if the person that's my opposite is looking for safety, significance, and belonging, and I'm looking for safety, significance, and belonging, are we actually opposites?
Well, no, but people feel that way because of the resistance to cognitive dissonance. For instance, for my honeymoon, I went to the Dominican Republic, and there were a group of people behind me that were frustrated because not enough people spoke English there. And they said, don't they want more of our money? Why don't they learn our language so they can? And it's like, you're in a foreign country and you're upset because you feel like an outsider. instead of just making the changes that you need to make. A week of Rosetta Stone will go a long way into making you feel included. Like, I learned how to sail in Spanish just because I worked at McDonald's when I was 14. And that level of being able to educate yourself, and the key is educating yourself, not relying on someone else to educate you, because Bo Burnham had this wonderful quote: read a book or something, just don't rely on me to educate you, because it's exhausting. But if you educate yourself, you would be surprised how easy it is to be included in the conversation.
Absolutely. What I would suggest as well is that the folks that we think are our opposite or on the other side that we need to build this bridge with is understand that we're after similar things, but the conflict comes in how we achieve those things.
Hmm.
So those people who want to make somebody feel small so they can feel big, they're after safety, significance, and belonging, but it's their methods that are problematic. So those people who go to a foreign country and say, why don't they speak my language? Brother, sister, let me just tell you, it is your method that is problematic. Those people in that other country, they want the same thing you want. And as a matter of fact, they do want that for you. But the challenge is your methods. And so all we do as human beings is behave. We're acting out how to either get safety, significance, and belonging, or how to give safety, significance, and belonging. We're behaving all the time. Human beings. We're being these things, right? Or we should be. And so when we think about what's one of the barriers to building these relationships across so-called differences, what's one of the biggest barriers? It is a lack of humility. Lack of humility. Devin, that example that you gave of the Dominican Republic, where the people were like, why don't they? You know why? Because you don't have humility to recognize that there's some work you probably could have done before you got there. Or there's some work that you need to do now that you're there. Because the people want to help you, but you're not humble enough. And so when you say this idea of the dumb American, I think that's, I appreciate that. I would just say that oftentimes we don't operate with humility. And so if there was one thing that I would like to leave folks with, is this notion that we can operate and should operate with this notion of humility, because that's all we're doing is behaving as we're trying to get safety, significance, and belonging. And that's how we address our bias across differences.
I love it. And with that, we are almost at time. So if you have a question, now would be the time to type it in the Q&A section. And while everyone's doing that, really quickly, I just wanted to shout out one of the people watching right now. And not just because he's my boss. I want to shout him out because he's like a genuinely dope individual. So Seth has been acknowledged as Minneapolis St. Paul Business Journal 2020 Business of Pride Award and Twin Cities Business 2021 Notable LGBTQA Executives Award winner. And they got this little blurb about him. Seth Vibrock, and I never know how to pronounce Seth's last name now I think about it, has ensured that his Bloomington-based digital marketing agency is devoted to diversity and inclusion. One sign is that his efforts are succeeding. His agency was awarded a National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce certification. He's also opened his home as a safe, trusted space for Twin Cities LGBTQA newcomers and their allies to connect and find inclusive social channels. In 2020, he hosted What to Do When You Want to Do More, a webinar that discussed the importance of Black Lives Matter, its intersectionality with pride, and how people and businesses can do allyship right. So definitely kudos to Seth all the flowers. And thanks for putting us in a position to have this conversation. And again, not just because he signs my paychecks, he is a genuinely dope human being, and it is a pleasure to work for him. Keep signing my paychecks. Cool. I love him to death. And then the other thing is something that HubSpot just took on, which was something called Black at Inbound. And this is something that I actually started back in 2016 because I was looking for an opportunity for us to leverage relationships with Black professionals. We didn't have it there. And so the mission with Black and Inbound is to connect and celebrate Black business professionals through mentorship, networking, and resources to amplify your voice and your work as you are. And you can find out more about that at HubSpot.com/Black and Inbound. And while I'm the guy that started Black and Inbound once upon a time, I am definitely not the guy currently running it. I'm just here. So if you want to find out more, that's for us and allies. Everybody, feel free to sign up. And so with that, I wanted to talk about one last thing, which is our next webinar, the Perfect Digital Marketing Team Structure, which is happening next month, Wednesday, July 14th at noon, same bat time, same bat channel. And the presenter next month will be Laura Riskin, who's a new addition to us here at 08. She's Director of Technical Operations here, and she is a moving and a shaking. And so that will definitely be a great conversation there. And so with that, we have a few minutes left. We're going to open up Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? I was inbox some questions, and so I can talk about some of the ones that we haven't discussed. There was one that was really good. Where is it? I really liked it. Let's see. It was something about the lens. How do you know the culture lens of someone you meet for the first time?
Humility.
Yes.
You ask, right? So here's the other thing. So this is one of the things that I am being very conscious of. Why do I need to know? So is it because it will help me be more effective as a human being? Because it will help me be more effective in my job? Or am I just being nosy? And if I'm just being nosy, then I need to go to Google, watch some YouTube videos, figure out some of that stuff on my own. Or if I'm really trying to build relationships, then I do that over time. But if I see somebody at the grocery store, why do I need to know what their sexual orientation is? Is that helping me in any way? Is it drawing me as a human being, or am I just being nosy? What do I need to know about their, is that their child or is that their grandchild? How is that? So motive is the first thing I would go to.
And one more quick thing to add before we go is that it really doesn't matter. You can just talk and be your authentic self. And not only will that allow you to communicate you in your way, but that will also be a learning experience for the both of you, because then you're learning about the other person, who they are. Like, I personally am not the ambassador or representation of all things Black. I'm not. I don't, like, 90% of the stereotypes don't apply to me. I'm sorry, but it's just be your authentic self. And with that, we are at time. Thank you everyone for coming out. Andre, you are amazing. Appreciate you. We're definitely going to talk more offline. I have a new friend. And everyone, thank you for participating. Again, congrats, Seth. You are a dope human being. And for everyone else, you're probably pretty cool too. Tell your friends. We'll send out this recording afterwards. And aside from that, thank you for coming and have a great rest of the day.